Well, hey everyone, welcome to episode 297 of The Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds. And strap yourself into your guitar-shaped spacecrafts today, people, because this week we are celebrating the 45th anniversary of the debut album by Boston with the man who shaped rock and roll radio records and culture forever, Mr. Tom Scholz. The debut LP from the band Boston was released August 25th, 1976, exactly 45 years ago this week. And from that point forward, the music that Tom created in his basement studio has been reverberating around the global radio waves and from record player styluses around the world. The Boston debut album has reportedly sold in excess of 20 million copies, alongside a tremendous and irrefutable impact on rock radio culture. Every track on that debut album took its place as an earworm for generations to come, and all this from an album produced at the time by an amateur musician in his home-built basement studio. It's as if an apprentice bricklayer built the Taj Mahal. The story of the Boston album sits alongside the story of the founding of Apple Computers, only instead of two guys named Steve, it was one guy named Tom, a songwriter, musician, and MIT-educated mechanical engineer who worked for the Polaroid company during the day and labored over his musical passion at night. Tom Scholz built that first record, created a sonic landscape unlike any other, and did it all himself, his way, following his instincts and taste. The story of Boston is the story of the American dream, and this week we celebrate the 45th year of this industry-changing and culturally seismic album with the founder himself. Now, in today's episode, part 1 of 2, we'll focus on the story of that first album, the challenges of getting it completed, Tom's engineering approach in the studio, some stories of the bungling record executives, and oh yeah, you gotta hear what they originally proposed as an album cover before the guitar spaceship was made. It's absolutely hilarious. Now, that's on today's episode. Now, later in the week, we'll share part 2 of this interview with Tom talking about vinyl, his thoughts and experience with analog and digital audio, the science behind it. And I gotta warn you now, we go pretty deep and nerdy in that episode, but it's still super informative, and I think fans and record collectors will certainly enjoy. That'll be on episode 298 of the Vinyl Guide, so hit subscribe and follow the Vinyl Guide podcast on your podcast app so you're alerted the moment that part 2 of this interview becomes available. And just a quick word from our show sponsors, AudiofileUSA.com sells only excellent and near-mint vinyl records. AudiofileUSA.com has over 42,000 vinyl titles in stock, all in gorgeous shape and ready for your love and arms. Browse, search, and dig deep into AudiofileUSA.com and find your holy grail. Now, we're also sponsored today by Groove Washer, the best record cleaner you can get. If your local record shop doesn't carry the Groove Washer, grab one from GrooveWasher.com and use discount code VinylGuide10 at checkout. That's GrooveWasher.com, discount code VinylGuide10. Oh, and by the way, all our Patreon supporters have been enjoying both interviews with Tom for quite some time now. So if you can't wait to hear more or wish to support our show, head over to patreon.com/vinylguide, where you get to hear the rest of the show. And without further ado, let's celebrate 45 years, which is an absolutely long time to hitch a ride with this smokin' rock and roll band who provide us much more than a feeling and peace of mind. It's Boston Week here on the Vinyl Guide. Please enjoy part 1 of our interview with Mr. Tom Scholz. Hello, hello, hello.
Hello, Nate. It's Tom Scholz.
Tom, how are you today?
Not too rotten. How are you? I hope I'm not waking you up. I know it's early there.
Oh, it's 9:00 in the morning. I have kids, so don't worry. I've been up.
Oh, all right.
Early.
Never mind.
Well, look, I don't know how many people have shared this with you, but happy anniversary. I believe it's been 45 years. since that first.
It is approximately 45 years. That's right.
So how are you planning to celebrate the 45th anniversary of the first Boston album?
Let's see. After talking to you about vinyl records, I think I'm going to have a shot of really high-quality vodka and watch my favorite shows on TV.
I always think of that first Boston album. It always reminds me a bit of a tech startup, in that it was something you were doing in your garage. It was off hours of your, balancing your day job from it.
That's true.
Bringing in specialists for the bits you couldn't do. It's a bit of a moonshot, but it felt like you were someone driven to kind of take that.
I had invested so much of, I would say, I invested so much time and I invested so much money. But it was actually a lot more than I invested so much of myself in getting to that point of having actually created this music. I never set out to do any of these things. I just wanted to play guitar in a band. That was it. I didn't want to write songs and be a band leader and record music and be the engineer and the producer and all of those things. Never crossed my mind. Just wanted to play guitar in a band. And the further I got in trying to do that, the more I realized I had to do some of these other things. And as I did them, I slowly realized I had to do all of these other things in order to get what I was looking for, which was ended up being a certain sound and music with a feel to it. The first Boston album was based on a half dozen demos that were my last shot at expressing what it was I liked in terms of rock music, both in the composition of it, in the way it was recorded, in the sounds that were on it, and the way the amplifiers and the guitars sounded. It was just 100% nothing but what I liked. And I was fortunate that I was able to do almost all of it by myself, with the exception, of course, of Brad Delp adding his incredible vocal talents to it. But all the rest of it, I basically could do. So it could be just an expression of what I liked. And by this point, we're talking roughly 6 years of me really working hard at this, spending all my money on it. And I was married at the time, spending all our money on it, and also all my spare time, and a lot of time that I was supposed to be working on doing other things that I was doing music instead. So, I was basically all in at that point. And those half a dozen demos were not something that I thought were going to have any mass appeal. In fact, I wouldn't have been at all surprised if nobody else liked them.
But actually, didn't you design them with like the radio experience in mind? Like you had the awareness of compression and how to pan and phase things just right to where it's pleasant to the ear.
Well, it was pleasant to my ear, and that's the only thing I knew, because you have to remember, I had been rejected for 6 years straight, and and even those demos were rejected by, I sent them to like 24 different record labels back in the early mid-70s. Almost everybody rejected it out of hand. Even the company who released it and sold 17 million copies, even they sent me a letter. In fact, the guy who sent the letter sent one of the most insulting rejection letters I got of the whole bunch. I mean, he went out of his way to say just how terrible, how useless he thought it was that I was doing music. This same guy, by the way, later claimed credit for discovering Boston.
Of course. What success has many fathers, failures, and orphans.
But I had been rejected by everybody. So I thought, well, they know what they're talking about. They sell records. So whatever I like is just not that popular. But it was what I liked. and it was what I liked, and since I liked it, and I had put a lot of effort into it, those last half a dozen songs that I recorded, I said these basically represent, and I was quitting after that point. I mean, it was coming to an end. I was almost 30. I had spent all my time, all my money, and I realized I had to have a little more responsibility than that, and I could not keep doing it. So the plan was make the demos, send them off, and sell off all the equipment and start being a more upstanding Polaroid employee. But, I'm really lucky they put up with me for all those years.
Just for perspective, how close were those demos that you were sending out to what became that first Boston album?
Oh, practically identical. The shocking thing was, so they heard the demos, and the mixes weren't stellar, but the master and all the tracks, they wanted them recorded by a professional producer. That was their whole thing. So, well, these are great, but they're demos, and we need them recorded by a professional. All right. So they actually weren't recorded by a professional producer because I made a deal with the guy that they hired to be the producer, who basically made a deal with me that we would split the whole thing. I would record the master tracks in my basement studio by myself, and then we would mix it together someplace else. So the actual recordings were made exactly like the demos. In fact, I was a little miffed because I don't like doing that. Basically, when I'm doing a track for something that I'm recording, I sit down and I start playing against the actual tape machine, whatever track I have down there. And I go back and forth between the instruments, changing the parts as I go, trying new things. And once I hit something that I like, it doesn't get erased. That's it. Right. If there was a little hiccup in it or something else, too bad. That's the one I like. So I didn't like the idea of re-recording it. I was pretty miffed about that. Also, an enormous amount of work. I mean, when I did the original, I didn't have to do it just like something else. I just did what I wanted, right. What I was doing, and that was it. So now I had to actually do it again. So I thought of it sort of as I would if I was playing live. That's how I got myself through it, sort of emotionally. And I now I knew how the song went exactly, and now I knew how all the parts went because I had tapes that showed me exactly what I had done before. And so I basically I did that. I ran the tape and pretended I was playing live someplace. And that actually, I think, helped the actual performance of the real performance.
Did you over-record it all? Were there songs that were recorded or in somewhat of a constructive state that you ended up leaving off that first album?
No. There was one of the 6 demos went on the second album instead of the first album, but everything that I worked on went on that album as planned. However, since you bring it up, there have been multiple times when I have spent months, even at one point 6 months, completely recording a piece of music and then just going nope, and putting it back on a shelf or throwing it in a wastebasket, and that happened several times. I had to listen to these tracks, you might imagine, so many times. I mean, not hundreds, thousands of times. Unlike a more typical artist or band, where the guitar player comes in and plays some his rhythm parts and then goes and plays video games or whatever. The producer takes a break while the engineer is trying to sort out problems in the sounds of the mix. That I didn't get any of those breaks, so I was there for every time that tape machine ran. I was on call, so to speak. So I had heard them a great deal, is what I'm trying to get at. And there were times when I wasn't sure what I was listening to anymore. There was, for instance, when I recorded an instrumental called The Launch for the third album, which was a piece of music I really liked, and I thought I would really like this. By the time I got done with it, I thought, you're just making noises with all these crazy gadgets that you've invented, and this isn't even music anymore. And I put it on, I finished it, I put it on the shelf, and I said, I'm going to come back to this in a month or two while I work on some other things and see if it's as terrible as I think it is. And I, of course, was when I did take it off the shelf and listen to it, I went, holy crap, how did I do that? So, but there were other times where I did that and I went, yep, this is crap.
Right. I got a friend of mine who works for Pixar movies, and he said right up until they pull it out of people's hands, they're tinkering with it.
Yep.
There's a motto they have internally: Pixar movies don't get released, they escape.
That is an exact description of a Boston album.
Yeah. How do you know when to stop tinkering?
I never did. It was one of my worst characteristics is that I never knew when to stop. And in fact, even after every single Boston album after it was released had revisions. There were changes in the master that might go into the effect on the next 2 million that were sold, but not on the first 3 million. And I literally wouldn't stop until I got my head into something else that was basically took over my life, and then I would stop fooling with the last thing I did. So that was actually my. I stopped recording for instance, on a track, on a song, when I thought that there was nothing I could do that would make this any better. I could only make it worse. So that's when I stopped.
That's interesting. It's like in software, those are dot releases.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, in terms of that, so the early pressings of the Boston album have slight variations to ones that were probably pressed a year afterward. Yeah?
Yeah, that's probably true. And now the worst thing is that at some point, these kind of all companies did it. When you first go in and master, you've got the actual 1/4-inch tape master, and you they cut the first series of discs directly from that master, and usually you're there. They also run what they call a EQ'd tape copy. That has all the little tiny changes in it that they do in the mastering studio while it's actually running to the cutting lathe. And what most of the companies did was after they would get those, run the first set of parts, as they called it, to stamp the vinyl, they might get 70,000 copies or 100,000 copies if they really pushed it. But then they had to scrap it. So when they had to cut more parts to stamp more records, if your record was selling well, instead of going back and rerunning the master from the original master recording and doing all the little moves that they did in the studio, they would run it from the tape copy. So you're automatically down. You were talking about noise floor earlier and digital. You're automatically sacrificing the noise floor and whatever limitations their 2-track machine had that they copied it onto. Yes, there were changes for numerous reasons. One is because I kept changing it. The good part about that is that then I knew it was running from the actual original track again.
That's a good strategy.
And then the other thing is the record company is always messing with it by running it from a second generation tape copy, so you had lost a little bit of audio fidelity.
Do you remember what some of those variations were?
Oh, they were always simple EQ changes, level changes. There were a few times where I actually cut things out of the tape and replaced them with something else, actually changed the master. But the average person, even a careful listener, couldn't have told where it was or what I did. I knew it. And so I felt better about it because if there was something in there I didn't like or hadn't intended to have in there, um, it was finally fixed.
Mm-hmm.
No, nobody else knew.
Okay.
I never knew. But I was driven to make this. These things were sort of, they were my babies.
Mm-hmm.
I had done all of this enormous amount of work that often is done by a whole crew of people, and so it was really important to me, that it represent the best I could do. And it didn't represent that until I had my little changes in there.
Now, back in the day, obviously there was vinyl, there was 8-track, maybe reel to reel. I'm not sure if Boston came out on reel to reel, cassette. Did the end product play into any of the decisions in mastering?
There were two things. First of all, as I was recording the songs, or even just writing them in some cases, I had in mind that I, wanted this song to flow into the next one, to set it up, or
Mm-hmm.
to be followed by this next thing, based on basically I was always looking for the impact,
Right.
and whether that was just a quiet emotional thing or really a surprise. Key changes made a huge difference in what that sequence was going to be, and I often actually changed the keys that songs were in so that when I started one after the other, it had the key change that I was looking for. So I had ideas about how I wanted it to go together, and of course there were a lot of things on Boston albums are sort of like medleys, or sound like they were, and that was in the back of my mind as I was doing it. Now, in reality, you have this thing in mind, and you put it together, and then you record it, and you put it on tape and hook it together, and sometimes I was surprised at how badly that worked out. So, I remember one particular thing involving on the first album, involving "Hitch a Ride," and I forget which other song it was, but I always had in mind, okay, "Hitch a Ride" is going to start right after the end on the fade out of this other thing, and I did it, and it made the song "Hitch a Ride" sound way too slow. It just sounded slow. And I go, I thought there was something wrong with my tape machine, and that I had run a duplicate at the wrong speed or something. And it was just simply one of those sonic things. Our ears are extremely adjustable, and if you whatever you listened to a minute ago has an enormous effect on how you hear the next thing, no matter what it is, in nature or in music. So I would often be surprised, and I would have to go back to the drawing board. So I had ideas. I tried them. When they didn't work, then I tried other things. Now, vinyl, because as I mentioned, it's a giant spiral. When they're cutting the inner tracks down near the label, the speed of the vinyl going past the needle is much slower, and it also has a much tighter radius. So there are some inaccuracies in the shape of the waveform because it's not actually something vibrating back and forth across a straight line and cutting a groove that looks exactly like the waveform, because it's on a circle. So there are limitations with what you can do on the inside track, both in level, in stereo separation, and especially in high frequencies. So knowing this, you want to try to plan to do certain things to keep songs that will not push the limits of that, that limitation. So yes, I took that. I had to take those things into account. I did not take into account how they were going to chop this thing up for an 8-track. I mean, that would just be impossible. I have no idea. I have no idea how they cut it up for an 8-track. Lots of people had the 8-track. I'd never heard one. So also, in cassettes, there was a lot of tug of wars between me and the various record labels about, well, they just wanted to change the sequence so that two sides would come out the same, and they could make the tape shorter and save money on the tape.
Right.
And it would always come back to, no, I don't think that's going to
Mm-hmm.
That's not the way I see it. So other than having to, fight with record companies about not destroying my creation when they run their cassette copies, I didn't have to do a lot when it came to cassette tapes. Didn't have any of those limitations that vinyl records do, and reel-to-reel tapes, of course, were gold as far as I was concerned. Even with what they used to call quarter track, quarter-inch machines, where you could play it one direction and hear the one side of the thing and flip it over and play the other direction and hear the other side of the album. Even with those, the reproduction was just fantastic compared to anything you can get today.
The fade in for More Than a Feeling, that seems to be very unique for the time, especially on an album opener. And I thought, was it covering something? Like, what was the decision around that?
No, and I was actually surprised when I remember when writers. Now this is really funny to me now when I talk about writers writing about my first album or reviewers, because I thought there was never going to be anything I was going to do that anybody was going to write about. So when I did that, I was not thinking in terms of what a reviewer would think of this album. No, actually, I just it felt like the right thing for me for that little lick to basically come out of nowhere, and it just kind of emerge out of the background of whatever's in your living room, and because I wanted that first bass note hit to be sort of a focal point, and I knew that if it was faded in out of nothing, that you would immediately start to pay first bass note hits. So that was it was just intentional for that, and no, I didn't think I was doing anything unique, but an awful lot of reviewers and people writing about that album subsequently talked about the audacity of fading in your first debut album song, and I thought, wow, I had no idea I was so controversial so soon.
So with the success of the first album, obviously the pressure was on for the follow-up, and to be able to do Don't Look Back in, I'd say it's a 2-year span with touring in the middle of it. Was that problematic?
And you left out Build a New Studio. Yeah. Because I, on top of that, the studio that I had recorded the first multi-track in got kind of semi-submerged under a really nasty town sewer backup. So I was in a new location in a new basement without a studio. So I also built a new studio with quite a few changes in it. And yeah, I was way too busy for those 2 years and getting a little testy because of it. Of course, everything was falling on me. Now I expected that, but I also sort of thought, well, all right, so I actually building a studio. I'm revamping some of the equipment I use. I have to write all the songs. I have to arrange them. I've got to play God knows how many different instrument parts to create basically the music that Brad can sing to. And I had lots of people who were involved in some way on the first album clamoring, well, what's taking you so long? Well, was it done yet? I mean, when are you going to be done? And I'm thinking, good Lord, I'm doing like 6 people's work here, and I need some time and some space. So yeah, I was getting harangued to death on that second album from all sides. Everybody who wasn't actually artistically contributing, let's say, but had made some money they were all over me for where's the next album? Where's the next album? So that was kind of a problem for me, and I really put my foot down. And there was a manager involved at the time, who was a nightmare, and he had some secret dealings with the record company. To make a long story short, they basically sort of absconded with the album before it was done. I mean, talk about something escaping from Pixar. Well, this one was stolen. It was stolen out from me in my studio. It was missing a song. The back side was only, I think, 14 and a half minutes or 15 minutes long. And there was a song that was supposed to go on there. So there were a few other issues too, but I was fortunate that I had a song that I had previously arranged and completely recorded that I mentioned earlier. I had several other pieces of music that I'd had in mind for quite some time that made the writing go a lot faster. And I got really lucky with Don't Look Back, which was not something that I had in a can or even in the back of my mind someplace. It's just one of those songs that fell together in the studio and turned out to be the single that they chose to release first. So, I was lucky that I was able to get it done in such a short period of time. As I say, it wasn't finished, and I was always a little annoyed. I didn't think I wasn't in favor of selling something at the normal price that was missing a song. Mm-hmm. And there were also I mentioned changing masters. That one had a lot of changes after the first delivery, and okay. Of course, it sold like 7 or 8 million copies. So. Most of the copies did have the changes in it, but the first few million probably didn't. So.
Now, I remember as a young man reading the liner notes, and very clear to me was no synthesizers used, no computers used. Why did you feel that needed to be stated?
There was one of the sales or marketing people at Epic Records had decided, according to, this is an account that I got from one of the marketing people many years later, I forget the guy's name, who decided that it would be a great hook, as they called it, for publicity purposes, if they decided to tell everybody that the music had been written by computers, and that was what made it so special. It was, music through science, which was total bullshit, because if anything, I was like the most organic wood instrument person out there. And the idea of using even a synthesizer instead of a Hammond organ was appalling to me. So they had started this rumor, and it really caught on. And there was a woman who wrote for Newsweek who interviewed me about the first album. And right at the beginning of the article, she says, Scholz denies that it was done on a computer. But, I think, how dumb can you be and be writing for Newsweek? I said, if I could do that in 1975, I would be a billionaire. I would not be writing rock and roll songs. I would not have to worry. I could just buy the places that I wanted to play and pay everybody to go. It wouldn't have mattered if I knew how to do that on a computer in 1975. Nobody could do it. Mm-hmm. So, but they printed it, and so there was a lot of negative response to that, which mm-hmm. I totally, and it really upset me, of course. This was the stuff that I dreamed about, the stuff that I had nightmares over losing, and drove myself crazy trying to actually mm-hmm. produce and create in a studio so that I could listen to it and somebody else could hear it. So I said, when the album came out, I just decided I would at least take my shot at it and make sure that they knew. Yeah, no, everything, because there were also some really unusual forget everything else about that first album, there were some really unusual sounds on that album.
Mm-hmm.
And they were unusual because they could only be made using the equipment that I had actually built. And these were some things that, some of them were actually did get patented at some point. Many of them didn't. They were just things that I used, but things that I basically dreamed up,
Mm-hmm.
and in some cases built, in my shop. So I had learned how to use these things and do some really wild stuff with it, like those little at the end of Foreplay. There's this little interlude about 30 seconds long of this really sounds I can't describe, and I can't describe them because they basically hadn't been made before. But I did them with this device and with my guitar, and a few hours at a time. And I was very proud of that fact that these were sounds that nobody else could do, nobody else could even copy, and nobody had any idea how I was doing it. So it did annoy me that they said, "Oh, he's written on a computer and recorded by a computer," or some damn thing like that.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact, what this was basically blood, sweat, and tears in a studio late into the night. So I definitely wanted to make that point.
Right.
I will say this: later on, when samplers got better and they could sample, they would give you a reasonable approximation of violins and things like that. I thought that was awesome. And it gave me the latitude to be able to use some orchestral sounds that I probably couldn't have gotten together if I hadn't had that available on keyboard. But back in, we're talking for the second album, that was back in '78. There was nothing. There was nothing like that.
So you would hear the sound in your head, and then you would go and create the device to create that sound that you had in your head.
I would, it was some of both. Some of it was sounds that I wanted to be able to make and couldn't figure out how to do it, and would try to build something to do it. And others happened because I was trying to build something different, and I ended up with
a lucky accident
that amazed me in a completely unexpected way. And that's also true of the music, by the way. I would often have an idea, and when I was actually trying to perform the various parts and on the various tracks, of course, I would make mistakes, or I would accidentally do something different, or try something, or play in the wrong key for a minute. And I came up with, because I got to do this over and over again, playing against tapes, I got to come up with some of the wildest things that I never would have thought of because I did them by accident. And once I had done it by accident, of course, saved it. And then I did it on purpose from that point on.
Now, when you listen to those records from 45 years ago, can you hear it as a completed piece? Do you still hear it as little things that you'd like to fix? What's going through your mind when you listen to a Boston album?
The first thing I had to do after each album, and after my finishing, my secondary fixes on the album were done, I would go out of my way to never hear that music for months, sometimes years. When I did go back and hear it, a great deal of time later, I was actually, I was usually really impressed with what was going on, because finally I could stop listening for all the little, cringe factors, as they used to call them, and I would just hear music that I knew, but the actual recording of it was. It was actually a breath of fresh air. Most of the Boston music that I wrote and released, to this day, I actually still do enjoy listening to it. So I don't want to sound egotistical or conceited, but I do like my music. So
okay, good. Distance always helps in that.
When I go back and listen, there are a few that I go, I don't know, I should have done something else. But almost all of them, I really enjoy listening, and I I still do hear unfortunately, most of the stumbling blocks that might have annoyed me back in the day. I still do hear those for the most part, but I was able to then put them in perspective because
Right.
the months later or years later, I'm listening to the whole piece and actually hearing a performance instead of just waiting for this one thing to come up that I hate. So, yeah, I liked it. I would enjoy it after the fact.
They call that wisdom, I think. That's the artwork, the flying spaceship guitar, the Boston logo. Were you involved in the creation of those elements as well?
My only part in the creation of that album was telling a manager that was going to relay my wishes or information, that suggesting how about a guitar that's a spaceship. That's the only thing that I said, and that came after Sony's Sony's creative department sent their 3 selections for the album cover that I had to choose between, which were a head of Boston lettuce, a slice of Boston cream pie, and a pot of Boston baked beans. So I don't know where they got confused in between selling records and produce, but I was definitely not down with the idea of putting any of those things. I thought, did they even listen to the music? I mean, how would you say Boston baked beans after you heard, Foreplay Long Time? And it just doesn't work. So I said to the guy who was relaying the information, I said, look, how about just get an artist to come up with a guitar spaceship? Well, Roger Hyson is the artist who did it, and his creation of that particular Boston guitar was totally his, and just blew me away, and still does to this day. Every time I look at that logo, I think, wow, I am the luckiest, so lucky that this guy came up with that brainstorm, because it was, now, I do have to tell you one little side story related to that. So you're familiar with the music, obviously, and my goal was always to try to make something that was both entertaining and uplifting in some way. And his artwork cover had this giant guitar spaceship. It was hovering over a city, and it was shooting out these gigantic death rays that were setting people on fire and blowing up buildings. And I looked at it and I said, I don't think he's quite got the idea of the music. So we went back a second time, and he came up with the idea of the Earth exploding and everybody escaping. And I thought, that's exactly what this is. This is an escape. That's what the music is, and it's exactly what I think of it. So, again, a great brainstorm on his part. He deserves all the credit for that.
I remember the Don't Look Back album, going through the gatefold, and all of a sudden the guitar spaceship had this story. There were the schematics. It was on this crystal planet now. It was like this whole other... Yeah,
it took on a life of its own, and of course we ended up bringing it on the road in various embodiments along the way, and it's been awesome. I love that little spaceship and the logo that's on it, and I'd be happy to plaster that on everything I own.
All right, people. So we're going to have to stop it right there. Again, this is the end of part 1 of our interview with Tom. You can hear part 2 right now at patreon.com/Vinyl Guide. Join us up there, hear the rest of the show, help support our podcast, and get all the extras. Otherwise, you can hit subscribe and follow the Vinyl Guide on your podcast app, and you'll be alerted whenever part 2 is available to enjoy. Thanks again for listening. Cheers.